What if I told you that in the heart of Mosul, ISIS tried to execute a Christian man by firing 27 bullets into his body, yet he stood alive on the ground as armed militants dropped their weapons in terror, trembling at warriors of fire they alone could see? This is not folklore. This is not a campfire exaggeration. What you are about to hear is a testimony written in both blood and light, in a land where ancient prophets once walked and where terror still stalks the streets. It is a story sealed in the dust of northern Iraq, the Nineveh Plains, a place that has witnessed empires rise and fall, but also where faith still costs lives. My name is Samir Haddad. I was born in Erbil, raised in the Christian quarter of Ankawa, where the call to prayer echoed every dawn and soldiers patrolled every night. From childhood, I knew what it meant to live under the shadow of danger. My father, Dr. Elias Haddad, often told me, "Samir, faith here is not inherited, it is chosen. And if you choose Christ, you choose the cross." By 2021, I had dedicated my life to serving the broken. I worked with a small aid group, delivering food and medicine to families scattered across the displacement camps near Mosul and the ruins of Karakosh. The scars of war were everywhere. Bullet-riddled homes, shattered churches, children learning to play beside burned-out tanks. To outsiders, ISIS had been defeated years earlier, but those of us who lived here knew better. Sleeper cells still moved silently through villages, planting fear like seeds in the night. On a late June morning, when the sun rose pale over the Tigris River, I loaded a battered white pickup with medical supplies, powdered milk, and schoolbooks for Yazidi children in the camps. It should have been another dangerous but routine mission. Instead, the desert road would become a stage for death, and for the power of God to be revealed. I want you to walk with me into this testimony, to feel the dust on your face, the chill of the underground dungeons, the hopeless weight of iron chains, and then the unexplainable radiance that turned executioners into trembling witnesses. Because what happened in those 17 days of captivity was not simply survival. It was the collision of heaven and hell, light against darkness, angels against bullets. And before we go any further, I must say this. If stories like this stir something in your heart, don't just watch in silence. Don't let these testimonies vanish into forgotten corners of the internet. If you believe this voice must be heard, stand with us. Subscribe, share, and declare with us that darkness will never overcome the light. The summer of 2021 carried a heat that clung to the bones. In northern Iraq, the desert does not simply burn, it breathes, pressing itself into every pore, coating the air with dust that tastes like ashes. For most, it was just another summer, but for me, it was the beginning of 17 days that would change everything. I had been serving as a humanitarian worker for almost 3 years, based in Erbil but moving frequently between the villages of the Nineveh Plains. Our organization was small, mostly local believers, with a few international partners who slipped in quietly when the border allowed. We were not soldiers, not politicians. Our weapons were sacks of flour, boxes of medicine, and the word of God carried in whispers. Mosul had officially been liberated in 2017, yet its scars were everywhere. The once thriving city, ancient Nineveh of the Bible, was now a graveyard of collapsed walls and shattered families. Whole neighborhoods stood abandoned, the blackened skeletons of homes staring back at you like hollow eyes. Yet among the ruins, life still pulsed. Children played football in alleys lined with bullet holes, women sold bread from improvised stalls, and displaced families tried to rebuild a rhythm of survival. For me, the work was not statistics or projects. It was faces. I remembered Layla, a widow from Karakosh whose husband and 2 sons had been executed for refusing to convert to Islam. Every time we brought her flour, she pressed my hands and whispered, "You are God's reminder that we are not forgotten." I remembered Amin, a Yazidi boy of barely 9 years, who once asked me with wide eyes, "Will Jesus still find us if ISIS comes back?" That question haunted me, because the truth was, ISIS had never really gone. In the West, headlines celebrated their defeat, but in Iraq, we knew better. They were still here, scattered, lurking, waiting. Sleeper cells hid in rural villages, smugglers carried weapons across porous borders, and whispers of revenge moved like smoke through the streets. Our team lived by one golden rule: never take the same road twice. Kareem, our security coordinator, drilled it into us. The enemy is patient, he would warn. They watch patterns. One mistake is enough. And yet, mistakes are easy when you're tired, stretched, and trying to cover too much ground. On June 28th, 2021, I set out alone in an old Toyota pickup. Kareem was recovering from an illness, and I refused to delay the trip. Families in Hammam al-Alil, just south of Mosul, were waiting for insulin, antibiotics, and powdered milk. I told myself it was just another delivery, just another route. I told myself I was cautious enough. But deep down, I knew the risks. The road from Erbil into Mosul was a patchwork of checkpoints, some manned by the Iraqi army, others by Kurdish Peshmerga, and some by local militias whose loyalties shifted like the wind. At each one, I rehearsed the same story in Arabic. I am a humanitarian worker. I carry no weapons, no politics, only food and medicine. It was late afternoon when the sun began to dip, turning the desert horizon into a haze of gold and red. I was less than 20 kilometers from Mosul when I saw it, a black SUV parked sideways across the road. No flag, no uniforms. Just 4 men, their faces covered with scarves, rifles slung across their shoulders. My stomach tightened. It was not the first time I had seen fake checkpoints. Sometimes they were run by smugglers, sometimes by tribal gangs. But the rifles, the posture, the cold stillness, my instincts screamed what I didn't want to admit: ISIS. I slowed the truck, praying silently under my breath. Psalm 91 had become my constant companion. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. One of the men raised his weapon and motioned for me to stop. The desert wind carried a thin layer of dust across the hood of the truck. My mind raced. 3 choices: turn back and risk being shot, accelerate and hope to break through, or stop and trust that God would carry me through. Before I could decide, the ground erupted. A small, controlled explosion, a crude IED blasted a few meters in front of the truck. Dust and gravel slammed against the windshield. My hands froze on the steering wheel. There was no escape now. Get out! The order came in harsh Arabic, tinged with a Syrian accent. My body obeyed before my mind could. Slowly, I opened the door and stepped into the suffocating heat. I raised my hands, trying to steady my voice. I am an aid worker, I said, my words trembling. I bring medicine for displaced families. The tallest of the 4 stepped forward. His eyes were sharp, predatory. He yanked the ID badge from my chest and spat on the ground when he read it. Samir Haddad, a Christian name, he sneered. So it's true, a crusader walking our land. The others laughed not with humor, but with cruelty. One leaned into the truck, rifling through the supplies. He pulled out a small New Testament hidden among the boxes of powdered milk. He raised it in the air like evidence of a crime. A missionary, he shouted. He poisons our people with this book. The blow came fast. The butt of a rifle slammed into the side of my head. The world spun. Dust and blood filled my vision. I crumpled to the ground, my ears ringing. Through the haze, I heard them speaking in low tones. Names, instructions, laughter that chilled the soul. I tried to focus, but my head swam. Then came the cold steel of shackles around my wrists. My feet were dragged across the sand, the pickup and its precious cargo abandoned behind me. The last thing I saw before blackness swallowed me was the setting sun over the Nineveh Plains, red, heavy, almost prophetic. I knew then that I was no longer simply a humanitarian worker on a mission. I was a captive, a pawn in the hands of men who delighted in death. But what none of us knew, not them, not me, was that God had already set the stage for a miracle. When I regained consciousness, the first thing I tasted was iron, the taste of blood filling my mouth. My head throbbed, each heartbeat slamming like a hammer against the inside of my skull. Darkness pressed in around me. The air was damp, foul, suffocating. Somewhere nearby, water dripped in a slow, endless rhythm. I tried to move, but the rattle of chains told me my ankles were shackled to a hook in the wall. My wrists were bound behind me, the rope biting into my skin. It didn't take long to realize where I was, underground. ISIS had dug an entire network of tunnels during their occupation of Mosul. Some were wide enough to move trucks, others barely large enough for a man to crawl through. Many had become secret prisons, and now one of those dungeons was mine. The door creaked open. A flashlight beam pierced the blackness, blinding me. A voice announced coldly in Arabic, "The infidel has awakened." 3 men entered. 2 wore black balaclavas. The third did not. His face was scarred, a jagged line running across his left cheek, and his eyes carried a cruelty that needed no mask. He was their commander. "Do you know who we are?" he asked. His tone was calm, almost casual, but it chilled me more than shouting would have. I nodded faintly. "Good," he continued. "Then you also know what we think of Christians. You are less than dogs to us, and you, a so-called aid worker, are worse. You spread your poison among our people." From his pocket, he pulled a smartphone and began swiping through photos. My breath caught in my chest. Images of me flashed across the screen, handing out supplies, praying quietly with believers, even baptizing Layla, a young woman who had left Islam to follow Christ. "We have been watching you for months," the commander sneered. "Every move, every contact. Did you think you could walk in our land unseen? No. You were marked, and now you will pay." He leaned close, his breath reeking of tobacco. "You have 2 choices: renounce your faith and join us, or die slowly." I closed my eyes and whispered the only words I could find. "I am a follower of Jesus Christ. I cannot deny him." The first blow came without warning, a fist driving into my stomach. I gasped, the air knocked out of me. Another blow split my lip. The commander smiled thinly. "Let us see how long you last." The days blurred into a cycle of pain, hunger, and darkness. Time lost all meaning. There were no windows, no clocks, only the sound of the iron door opening and the rituals of torture that followed. Each morning, or what I thought was morning, they dragged me to a corner of the cell and ordered me to perform Islamic ablutions. When I refused, the lashes began. At first 5 strokes, then 10, then 20. My back became a canvas of open wounds. The smell of infection crept in. Fever fogged my mind. Some sessions were designed not to extract information, but to break my spirit. A young man named Tariq, with a Jordanian accent, often led these. He enjoyed mocking me, calling me the stubborn crusader. Once, he attached crude electrodes to my fingers. "Your American brothers taught us this," he said with a smirk. When the current surged, my muscles convulsed violently, my teeth grinding so hard I thought they'd shatter. And yet, in those moments, something strange happened. Words spilled out of my mouth that I did not understand, a river of sounds, prayers in a language beyond me. The tormentor recoiled. "What are you doing?" he shouted, cranking the voltage higher. But the more pain surged, the more those holy sounds poured forth. Finally, shaken, he dropped the wires and stormed out. That night, Romans 8:26 came to me in the silence. The Spirit helps us in our weakness. The Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Even in my lowest place, I was not alone. On the 5th day, they escalated. They dragged me to a room with a single camera on a tripod. A man I later learned was Omar al-Shamari, one of their media handlers, stood beside it. "Today we record your confession," he announced. "You will admit your crimes against Islam." They didn't want truth. They wanted my collapse. When I refused, punishments followed. Beatings, mock executions, even being forced to watch brutal videos of others who had been killed. One evening, they brought in a boy no more than 12 and forced him to watch as I was whipped. "This is how infidels end," the commander told him coldly. "Learn it well." The boy's wide, terrified eyes haunted me more than the blows. In that moment, I began to pray not for myself, but for him. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I spoke their names in prayer, Omar, Tariq, Faisal, even the boy, and asked God to break through their darkness. I did not know then that those prayers were seeds, seeds that would sprout in the most impossible of soil. By the 10th day, my body was near collapse. Infection burned through my wounds, my lips cracked from thirst, my voice hoarse from screaming. Each night, they whispered threats. Tomorrow will be your last. Then, one evening, they entered with something new, an orange jumpsuit, folded with precision. They tossed it at my feet. "Put this on," the commander ordered. "We want you to grow used to the idea." The color was unmistakable. It was the uniform of the condemned, the same kind worn by countless martyrs whose executions had been broadcast to the world. My hands trembled as I pulled it on. The rough fabric stuck to my wounds like sandpaper. "You still have a chance," the commander whispered, tracing a finger across his throat. "Recite the Shahada, and your death will be quick. Refuse, and it will be slow." That night, they gave me a feast rice with lamb, bread, dates, hot tea, a condemned man's last meal. I ate slowly, every bite tasting of finality. And yet, something stirred in me. As I lay on the cold floor, I began to pray not for escape, not even for life, but for gratitude. Gratitude for every moment I had lived, every soul I had met, every chance to serve. Gratitude even for my captors. And as I prayed, a peace descended. Not resignation, but presence. A warmth filled my chest, flowing into my limbs, even into the wounds on my back. For the first time in days, I slept without fear. What I did not know was that dawn would bring not an end, but the opening act of a miracle. The sound of keys jolted me awake, metal scraping, boots on concrete, muffled voices outside the cell. Dawn had not yet broken, but I could feel it, the weight of morning pressing through the cracks in the dungeon. My heart pounded as the door swung open. 3 men entered, their faces covered in black. Their footsteps were deliberate, final. One carried handcuffs. Another held a rope. Behind them, I recognized the commander by the scar across his cheek. His voice was tight, colder than usual. "It's time," he said. They yanked me to my feet, shackled my wrists, and shoved me into the corridor. The orange jumpsuit clung to my wounds, every step a jolt of pain. We climbed a narrow staircase that seemed to go on forever. Then, for the first time in more than 2 weeks, I felt fresh air. The courtyard was bleak, enclosed by concrete walls. Floodlights powered by a small generator blazed down harshly. Cameras on tripods were already set up, lenses pointed at the platform in the center. The black flag of ISIS hung in the background, its white script glowing in the artificial light. I was forced to kneel on the sand-covered stage. The ground was cold and damp, seeping through the thin fabric of my suit. The smell of oil, sweat, and dust clung to the air. One of the men pulled out a curved blade, turning it slowly in his hands for the camera. Another chambered his rifle with a sharp metallic click. It wasn't just an execution. It was theater terror scripted for the world to watch. The commander stepped forward with a sheet of paper. His voice rose, chanting slogans, condemning Christians, glorifying the caliphate. His words echoed against the walls, filling the courtyard with venom. I bowed my head. My lips whispered, Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And then it happened. Halfway through his speech, the commander's voice faltered. His words caught in his throat as if struck by an unseen force. He coughed, stumbled, then froze his eyes wide, fixed not on me, but at something surrounding me. The executioners looked too. One dropped his knife. It clattered against the ground. Another staggered backward, his rifle slipping from his hands. The camera operator cursed under his breath, adjusting the lens as if trying to make sense of what was unfolding. I felt it before I saw it. A warmth, a vibration in the air, a living energy that wrapped around me like fire without heat. My skin tingled. The chains on my wrists seemed suddenly weightless. The commander gasped. "What is this?" His voice cracked with terror. Behind him, one of the guards fell to his knees, trembling violently. Another cried out in a Chechen accent, Nur, the light." I lifted my head. Though my eyes saw no figures, I knew heaven had descended. Angels, warriors of flame. I could not see their faces, but I could feel their presence towering, fierce, holy. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Some men screamed as if burning from within. Others dropped to the ground, paralyzed with fear. The floodlights flickered wildly, then blazed brighter than ever, washing the whole place in unbearable brilliance. One soldier ran toward the gate, only to slam against an invisible barrier. He stumbled back, shouting incoherently. The cameras kept rolling, capturing terror instead of triumph. I stood, though I don't remember how. The chains at my wrists fell broken to the ground. The pain in my body vanished, wounds gone, fever gone, every scar erased as if a divine hand had swept them away. The commander clutched his chest, gasping for breath. He ripped at his robes as though his heart were on fire. "They touched me!" he cried. "The warriors of fire, they pierced me here!" He collapsed, sobbing like a child. One by one, the men confessed what they saw. Some described blinding light. Others spoke of towering figures with swords of flame. Their voices shook with fear and awe. And then, silence fell. Heavy, sacred, absolute. I knelt again, tears streaming down my face. But not from fear, from glory, from knowing I had just witnessed the armies of heaven invade the heart of Mosul. The commander crawled toward me. His eyes, once burning with hatred, were now wide with desperation. "Your God," he whispered. "He is real. I saw him. I felt him." Another man, still shaking, pointed at the camera. "The recording," he stammered. "Look." We crowded around the screen. The footage showed the setup, the commander's speech, my kneeling body. Then, at the moment of intervention, the screen exploded into white. Pure, unfiltered brilliance consumed the lens for several seconds. When the image returned, chaos filled the frame, soldiers screaming, weapons falling, men stumbling in terror. It wasn't a malfunction. It was testimony. For long moments, no one spoke. The courtyard, once an altar of death, had become holy ground. Finally, the commander stood, his voice trembling but resolute. "No one touches this man again," he ordered. "What happened here is beyond us, beyond everything we thought we knew." Instead of dragging me back to the pit, they led me upstairs to a room with a window, a bed, and clean water. It wasn't freedom, not yet. But it was more than survival. It was the beginning of transformation. That night, as I gazed at the stars through iron bars, I whispered, "Lord, even in Mosul's darkest hour, your light is greater. Even on the ground of execution, you are victorious." I didn't know then that this was only the first miracle. Within days, the very men who had chained me would kneel again, not in fear, but in surrender. Not before me, but before Christ. The courtyard incident left the compound in uneasy silence. The men who once strutted in confidence now whispered in corners, eyes darting as if afraid of shadows only they could see. Some avoided me altogether, crossing themselves in a way that betrayed both fear and confusion. Others lingered, staring as if searching for answers. The commander, whose scarred face I had come to dread, was the first to break. He no longer wore his black robe. One evening, he came into my new room, dressed in simple clothes, a plain shirt, dusty trousers. His eyes, once sharp with hatred, now carried the weight of sleepless nights. He paused at the door, his voice softer than I had ever heard. "Have you eaten today?" The question startled me. Days earlier, his words had been threats. Now they sounded almost human. "I'll send food," he added quickly. "Medicine too, if you need it." Though, his eyes dropped to my healed arms and back. "It seems your wounds no longer need us." He sat heavily on a wooden bench. For a long moment, he said nothing, rubbing his scar as though trying to erase it. Finally, he exhaled. "Every time I close my eyes," he whispered, "I see them. Light, fire. A man in white, with hands scarred, yet radiant. He calls me by name. He says, his blood can forgive even me." My heart pounded. Here was the man who had threatened my life, now trembling like a child. That was no dream, I said. That was Christ. He has come to you as he came to me. He is calling your name. He looked at me, tears gathering in his eyes. But how could he forgive me? I have ordered executions. I have shed blood. I was a monster. I reached across the table, grasping his trembling hands. No sin is greater than his grace. The thief on the cross received mercy in his final hour. Saul, who murdered believers, became Paul, the apostle. If you turn to him now, you will find the same forgiveness. The commander, whose name I now learned was Yusuf al-Duri, bowed his head. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs. That night, in whispers, he surrendered. The transformation spread like fire in dry grass. Within 2 days, several of the guards came to me privately. One was Faisal, the man who had beaten me most often. His eyes were red, his arms trembling. "My burns," he whispered, pulling up his sleeves. Scars from old wounds shimmered faintly in the lamplight, fading before our eyes as new skin formed. Tears streamed down his face. He touched me. He said, "Your sins are forgiven." One by one, they confessed their nightmares and visions. A man in radiant white garments, calling them each by name, showing wounds in his hands. They spoke of unbearable love, of shame and hope colliding inside them. In secret, we began to gather at night. 8 men in all, Yusuf, Faisal, Tariq, and others whose names I keep hidden, sat cross-legged on the floor, whispering prayers, hungry for truth. They had never read the Bible. For them, even saying the name Isa al-Masih, Jesus the Messiah, felt dangerous yet freeing. On the second night, Yusuf turned to me. "I want to be born again," he said firmly. We had no church, no font, just a clay jar filled with water. In the flickering glow of a single lantern, I baptized him Yusuf, once a commander of terror, now reborn as a child of Christ. His tears fell into the basin as I poured water over his scarred head. "Freedom," he whispered, clutching my hands. "For the first time in my life, I am free." But freedom in spirit was not yet freedom in body. News traveled quickly in militant networks. Yusuf warned me that senior commanders would be arriving within days. If they discovered what had happened, defections, baptisms, a growing faith, the punishment would be swift and brutal. Apostasy was death. "We cannot stay," Yusuf said one night, his jaw tight with resolve. "We must escape, and I will lead you." I hesitated. "What about the others?" He nodded. "Some will come with us. Others must remain, hidden for now. But what God started here will not end here." And so the plan began. Yusuf, once my captor, now became my guide. He forged documents, studied maps, and plotted a route north. His years of militant training, once used for violence, were now bent toward salvation. "God is using even my sins for his glory," he said bitterly, almost in awe. We set out before dawn, 2 battered vehicles rumbling across the dirt tracks leading out of Mosul. The tension was suffocating. Every checkpoint was a gamble. Iraqi soldiers eyed us suspiciously. Militias demanded paperwork. At each stop, Yusuf's calm voice carried us through. He spoke with authority, his old role lending him credibility. Still, danger lurked everywhere. At one roadblock, near Bartella, a guard's eyes lingered too long on my face. My heart raced. Yusuf leaned forward, scowling, barking orders in a clipped dialect. The guard stiffened, saluted, and waved us through. Only after we were clear did Yusuf exhale. That was close. Another minute and he would have recognized you. The journey stretched nearly 20 hours. We ate little, slept less, each mile an act of faith. Dust coated our throats. Shadows stretched long across the desert. But hope pulled us forward. Finally, the Kurdish mountains rose before us, jagged, ancient, unyielding. At a Peshmerga checkpoint near Erbil, Yusuf stopped the car. He looked at me, eyes heavy with exhaustion and conviction. "This is as far as I can go with you openly," he said. "But remember this. The God who rescued you in the courtyard has also rescued me. His work is only beginning." We crossed into Kurdish-controlled territory. For the first time in weeks, I breathed freely. My body was alive, My spirit was burning. I had entered captivity alone, but I was leaving with brothers who once swore my death. That night, under the safety of a Kurdish aid compound, we gathered in a small room. 8 men, kneeling side by side. No weapons, no black flags, only broken hearts made new. Yusuf's voice trembled as he prayed aloud. Your God is now my God. The one who spared him has spared us. We renounce death. We choose life. We choose you, Jesus. And in that dimly lit room, surrounded by former enemies turned brothers, I understood. My testimony was no longer mine alone. It was theirs too. A story of chains broken, bullets silenced, and hearts reborn. But none of us knew the full truth yet. The miracle in Mosul was not the end. It was the spark of a fire that would soon spread to refugee camps, villages, and even hidden corners of militant cells. God had begun an underground revival. Word traveled the way it always does in Iraq, quicker than the wind, slower than the truth. Within weeks of our escape, whispers about the man the bullets could not kill moved from tea houses in Erbil to camp alleys in Duhok, from church courtyards in Karakosh to safe houses tucked along the highways to Zakho. But the real story was not my survival. It was what God was doing in the shadows, quietly, stubbornly, like a spring pushing up through concrete. The Kurdish authorities questioned me first. They were courteous, skeptical, relentlessly practical. A plain room interview with 2 Asayish officers, a recorder on the table, the fragrance of bitter tea in the air. I told them everything. The dungeon, the execution ground, the light, the men who fell trembling. When I finished, one officer stared at the floor for a long time, then asked in a low voice, "And those men who helped you, where are they now?" I told him the truth. Some were with us under protection. Others had gone back into the darkness to guide others out. He rubbed his temples and sighed. "You realize," he said, "if this is real, it will spread." I said nothing. I didn't need to. It already had. In the weeks that followed, we settled into a rhythm inside a small humanitarian compound on the outskirts of Erbil. There were mattresses on concrete floors, piles of donated clothes, the steady hum of generators, the metallic clatter of pots in a makeshift kitchen. We woke to the rattle of water trucks and the gravelly laughter of guards telling the same jokes to survive the same days. In that imperfect refuge, I watched men who once trafficked terror learn how to pray like children. Yusuf no longer the commander, simply Yusuf rose before dawn to read aloud from a Kurdish translation of the Psalms. His voice was rough, uncertain at first, then sure, then soft with grief when certain lines found him. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Faisal cooked more than he spoke. He seasoned rice and lamb with a gentleness that seemed to apologize for all the hands he had broken. Tarek carried a small notebook everywhere, filling it with questions. Why did Jesus say, "Father, forgive them"? What does it mean to be new? If we are forgiven, what do we do with the past? We did what we could. We taught the scriptures slowly, like passing bread in a famine. We read the Gospels by kerosene light and wept at the places that hurt us most. We prayed for those still inside the cells, for the boy who had watched me beaten, for the faceless men who trained death into children. And then the first letters came, handwritten notes, passed through friends of friends who knew someone in a village where once there had been a unit men asking, anonymously, if it could be true that mercy was stronger than oath, that the man in white could come to them too. Our group widened, not in noise, never in noise, but in the quiet, stubborn way of seed and rain. In Bursave camp near Zakho, a tent would be transformed after dark into a prayer room. In Sharia, a grandmother who had lost everything pulled together a circle of widows to intercede for men she had every reason to hate. In Ankawa, a storefront church gathered names men and women who saw dreams they didn't understand and could not speak of aloud. The map on our wall grew crowded with small pencil stars. Every star was a soul reaching for air. It was not clean, and it was not easy. Some in the Christian community distrusted us, and I could not blame them. They had buried too many to welcome too quickly. One evening, in a parish hall in Karakosh, Baghdad, I stood beside Yusuf as he told his story to a small circle of church elders. He spoke plainly, no excuses, no softening of the facts. When he finished, silence pressed us to the wall. Then, an elderly priest, his hands shaking, removed his glasses and whispered, "Repentance is a miracle that costs heaven the blood of the Lamb. If God has paid that price, who am I to demand another?" He wept. So did we all. Not everyone was ready. Some meetings ended with doors closed, polite refusals, the protective steel of wisdom. We learned to accept "not yet" as part of the liturgy of healing. We offered what we could: confession without defense, restitution where possible, testimony without spectacle. Where the law demanded custody, we cooperated. Forgiveness is not the absence of justice, it is its beginning. A turning point came 6 months after the execution yard. A Yazidi father asked to meet Faisal. 2 years earlier, Faisal had been in the patrol that tore the man's family apart. We sat in a white-walled office with plastic chairs and a fan that clicked like a metronome. Faisal fell to his knees the moment the father entered. "I will not ask for your forgiveness," he said, forehead to the floor, "but I will not hide from my guilt." The father stood for a long time, lips pressed tight. Then, with a voice that sounded like time itself, he whispered, "I do not have forgiveness yet, but I do not want revenge anymore." He placed a hand on Faisal's head, not blessing, not absolution, but the first fragile silence where hatred once screamed. Sometimes, the miracle is not a trumpet blast. Sometimes, it's a chair pulled close enough to hear another man breathe. Meanwhile, the men who chose to return undercover sent word in the only ways they could. Folded notes tucked into sacks of flour, a verse scribbled on a torn cigarette carton, a whispered line at a checkpoint. "Tell them the man, with pierced hands, still walks the night." We never knew when a message would be the last. 3 of our brothers were found out. Their bodies were not recovered. We lit candles and read the Beatitudes, and it felt like saying yes to something far bigger than victory. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Their names are now the quiet standard we carry. And then the second wave arrived, not men haunted by guilt, but men emptied by disillusion. They came from farm roads outside Hawija, from safe houses on the outer ring of Kirkuk, from border towns where smugglers wear 50 loyalties to survive one night. They came with the same dream, a door opening, light flooding a room, a voice calling them by name. Many had never touched a Bible. Most had never met a Christian they did not hate. They wept as we read, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I watched the line of that verse draw men back from the edge. Our meetings took a dozen shapes. A blanket spread on gravel behind a clinic in Duhok, a half-finished house in Kasnazan, a truck bed parked under the smell of diesel and mint tea along Mockmore Road. We learned to keep our sermons short. A psalm, a story of Jesus, a prayer. We learned to keep our baptisms shorter. A jug of water, a name, a whispered amen, the sound of boots passing somewhere beyond the wall. Heaven is not offended by plastic buckets and borrowed towels. There were days I wanted to disappear to a coast somewhere, to a country where the only siren is an ambulance. But every time I imagined escape, a face returned. The 12-year-old boy in the dungeon corridor. The young soldier who hit the invisible barrier and trembled. The Yazidi father with a hand on a penitent's head. The gospel does not ask us to be safe. It invites us to be faithful. And what of the footage, the camera that swallowed white? Fragments surfaced through channels I still do not understand. Intelligence officers called it optical saturation, sensor overload, a localized EMP event. Perhaps. I am content with their words if they are content with our lives. What the lens could not carry, our bodies do. Scars that vanished, chains that fell, eyes that learned the weight of mercy. Some fragments reached pastors in Amman, a seminary in Lebanon, a house church in Gaziantep. They wrote to us, "We showed this to men who swore God was absent. They are not swearing anymore." The strangest grace of all was watching enemies become answers to prayers they once mocked. Yusuf memorized Luke 15 and could not read the parable of the prodigal without losing his place to tears. Faisal asked to volunteer at a trauma center for survivors. He learned to sit still, to hold silence, to be the kind of man who does not flinch at another's suffering. Tariq started tracing the names of victims in a notebook and blessing each one by name before he slept. I used to count checkpoints to measure danger. Now I counted redeemed habits to measure hope. One evening, we returned to Marmatai Monastery, high on the ridge that watches the plains where Assyrian Christians have kept vigil for more than 16 centuries. The wind pressed our clothes to our chests. Villages flickered below like coals under ash. We were permitted to sit in a small chapel, where a monk with weathered hands lit a candle and said, "This place has seen invaders, conquerors, plagues, and earthquakes. The wall does not remember their names. It remembers the prayers." We sat in that old room until the shadow retreated from the doorway, and the hills turned the color of a bruise healing. I have been asked whether I ever fear that the darkness will return. I answer honestly, yes. I have also learned that fear is not a map. It is a mirror. It shows me where I need the shepherd to walk closer. The same God who sent warriors of fire into a courtyard can send gentler flames into kitchens, clinics, classrooms, into the hard rooms where men choose truth over oath and mercy over pride. If you visit our compound now, you won't find fanfare. You'll find rice steaming in dented pots, verses taped to cracked walls, and laughter that starts too softly and ends too loudly, as if trying to catch up on years it was not allowed to breathe. You'll find men and women who carry two histories, what they did and what was done for them. And you'll find a table with extra chairs, the kind of table that believes someone else is coming, because someone else always is. This is the ripple. A boy who once watched violence now watches a baptism. A widow who once cursed the night now lights a lamp for strangers. A city that once trained executions now trains forgiveness. The wave keeps moving through refugee camps and checkpoints, through notes passed in markets and prayers whispered in stairwells, through families who dare to hope without forgetting, dare to forgive without pretending. The night we baptized our 10th brother in a borrowed plastic basin, the generator died mid-prayer. We kept going in the dark. When the water splashed, someone laughed, and someone sobbed, and someone, maybe it was me, said, "We don't need the lights. We have the light." Outside, a dog barked, and a truck downshifted, and somewhere far off a muezzin's call rode the wind like a memory. We stood in that darkness that was not dark at all, and we knew the resurrection had learned our names, and we would spend the rest of our days learning his. I began this testimony with bullets, 27 of them. Each one meant to silence me, each one meant to bury faith beneath fear. But the same God who raised Lazarus from the grave raised me from that execution ground. He sent his angels to stand where no man dared stand, and the very men who laughed at my death trembled at his light. I walked into captivity alone. I walked out with brothers who once swore my death. I entered chains that bruised my flesh. I left with scars erased by grace. This is not my story, it is his. A story written long before Mosul, long before ISIS, long before any war. The story of a God who steps into the darkest dungeons and declares, "Let there be light." Do not mistake this for myth. Even now, in refugee camps, in broken towns, in secret gatherings under cover of night, men and women who once followed death are kneeling before Christ. The ripples of that courtyard reach farther than I ever imagined. They reach to the father who forgave, to the widow who prayed, to the soldier who laid down his weapon, and maybe tonight to you. Because the question is not whether God saves in Mosul. The question is, will you let him save you where you are? If you have felt the weight of this testimony in your heart, don't let it pass like another video in your feed. Do not scroll away from the voice of heaven. Subscribe, share, and stand with us. Let this story be a fire in your soul, not just a memory on your screen. By sharing, you are declaring that the same light that fell in Mosul cannot be silenced, not by bullets, not by terror, not by death. I carry no pride in surviving. I carry only the message of the one who promised, "In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world." He overcame in Nineveh's ruins. He overcame in a courtyard of execution. He can overcome in your life, in your family, in your nation. This is the victory that was sealed in Mosul, under the black flag of terror, where angels made their stand. This is the hope that no bullet can kill, no chain can bind, no tomb can hold. This is the call to return. Return to Christ. Return to truth. Return to the gospel that outlives every empire. And tonight, as I close, I leave you with the same words that carried me when the rifles aimed and the knives gleamed. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. He was with me, and he is with you.